She was homeless, cold, and running out of hope. With her daughter asleep in her arms, she broke into a cabin no one had opened in 25 years. But the moment the door creaked open, her entire life changed. Because what she found inside was something no one could ever expect. Sarah had always believed she was strong, but strength feels very different when you're standing on a cold sidewalk at night with nowhere left to go. The city that once felt familiar now looked distant, almost unrecognizable, as if it had quietly decided she no longer belonged there. The streetlights flickered above her, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly, just like her worries. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself, trying to block out the biting wind, but it wasn't enough. Nothing felt like enough anymore. Emma stirred slightly in her arms, her small face pressed against Sarah's shoulder. "Mom," she murmured, her voice weak and sleepy, "are we going home now?" Sarah's heart tightened at those words. Home. That simple word now felt heavy, almost impossible to answer. She forced a soft smile even though Emma couldn't see it. "Soon, baby," she whispered gently, brushing a strand of hair away from Emma's face. "We'll be somewhere warm soon." But deep inside, Sarah wasn't sure if that was true. Every option she had tried had slipped through her fingers. Friends who once promised help suddenly had excuses. Shelters were full. The little money she had saved was gone faster than she ever imagined. It wasn't just the loss of her job or her apartment that hurt. It was the feeling of being forgotten, as if the world had quietly moved on without her. Just a few days earlier, things had been different. Not perfect, but manageable. She had a routine. Wake up early, get Emma ready, head to work, come back tired but grateful that they still had a roof over their heads. It wasn't much, but it was something she had built with her own effort. She had believed it would last. Then came that one moment, that one conversation that shattered everything. "I'm sorry, Sarah," her boss had said, avoiding eye contact. "We have to shut down, there's nothing I can do." She remembered standing there, frozen, as if her mind refused to process the words. "What do you mean, shut down?" she had asked, her voice barely steady. "It's final," he replied quietly. "Today is your last day." It didn't feel real at first. She walked home that day in silence, her thoughts spinning, trying to figure out what to do next. She told herself it was temporary, that she would find something else quickly. But days passed and nothing came. Every door she knocked on stayed closed. Every call ended with the same polite rejection. And then came the knock on her own door. Her landlord stood there, arms crossed, his expression cold and unmoved. "You're behind on rent," he said bluntly. "I just need a little more time," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. "I lost my job, but I'm trying. I'll fix this, I promise." He shook his head. "I've heard that before. You need to leave." Those words echoed in her mind even now, standing on that empty street. You need to leave. Just like that, everything she had worked for was gone, packed into a couple of bags, reduced to memories and regrets. The hardest part wasn't losing the apartment. It was watching Emma try to understand why everything had changed. Children don't always ask direct questions, but their eyes say everything. Emma's confusion, her quietness, the way she held onto Sarah a little tighter, it all cut deeper than anything else. Sarah took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't afford to break down, not now, not when Emma needed her the most. Fear was there, sitting heavy in her chest, but she pushed it aside. Fear wouldn't help them survive this night. She began to walk again, not because she knew where she was going, but because standing still felt worse. Each step felt uncertain, like she was moving without direction, guided only by instinct. The cold air brushed against her face, and for a moment she closed her eyes, trying to think, trying to remember if there was any place left to go. And then, almost like a whisper from the past, a memory surfaced. A cabin, hidden deep in the woods, far from the noise of the city. A place she hadn't thought about in years. Her grandmother's cabin. She remembered visiting it once as a child, holding her mother's hand, listening to stories she barely understood back then. After her grandmother passed away, no one talked about it anymore. It became one of those forgotten places, buried under time and silence. "No one goes there," her mother used to say. "It's better left alone." At the time, Sarah never questioned it. It was just another rule, another part of family history she didn't fully understand. But now, standing on the edge of losing everything, that memory felt different. It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like a possibility. She hesitated. What if the cabin was gone? What if it was falling apart? What if it wasn't safe? The questions came quickly, filling her mind with doubt. It would be easier to stay where she was, to keep searching for something familiar. But familiar hadn't helped her so far. Emma shifted again in her arms, letting out a soft, tired sigh. That sound was enough. Sarah looked down at her daughter, her small face pale from the cold, her body too still for a child who used to laugh so easily. In that moment, something inside Sarah changed. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her. It became smaller, quieter, pushed aside by something stronger. She realized she didn't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect solution. She didn't need certainty. She needed action. The cabin might not be safe. It might not even be there anymore, but it was something, a chance. And right now, a chance was more valuable than anything else. Sarah adjusted her grip on Emma and turned toward the road that led out of the city. Her steps were slow at first, heavy with doubt, but with each step, they grew steadier. The unknown lay ahead, and it was frightening, but it was also the only path left. She wasn't just walking toward a cabin. She was walking toward the possibility of survival. Toward the idea that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The night stretched on around her, quiet and uncertain, but for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in days. Not comfort, not safety, but the beginning of courage. The cabin stood in silence, half hidden behind tall, unmoving trees, as if the forest itself had been protecting it all these years. Sarah slowed her steps as she approached, her breath visible in the cold air, her heart beating louder with every inch closer. From a distance, it looked exactly how she remembered, old, worn, forgotten. But now that she was standing in front of it, something felt different. Not welcoming, not exactly threatening either. Just unfamiliar in a way that made her uneasy. Emma lifted her head slightly, her tired eyes scanning the dark outline of the structure. "Is this it?" she asked softly. Sarah nodded, though her confidence didn't match the gesture. "Yes, this is it." The wooden walls were faded, chipped by time and weather. The windows were clouded, making it impossible to see clearly inside. Vines had crept along one side, wrapping around the cabin like quiet hands that refused to let go. It should have looked completely abandoned, untouched for decades. And yet, something about it didn't feel entirely lifeless. Sarah stepped closer to the door, her boots crunching against the gravel. The old lock hung loosely, rusted but still holding its place. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering just inches away. A strange feeling settled in her chest, like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't fully understand. "Mom, why are you stopping?" Emma whispered. Sarah swallowed, shaking her head slightly as if to clear it. "Nothing, She paused, searching for the right words. "It's been a long time." She reached down, picked up a small rock, and without giving herself another second to think, struck the lock. The sharp crack echoed through the quiet woods, louder than expected. For a brief moment, everything felt still again, as if the forest itself had noticed. The lock gave way. Sarah pushed the door slowly. It resisted at first, then opened with a long, creaking sound that seemed to stretch through the air. A faint smell drifted out, dust, wood, something old, but not as heavy as she expected. She stepped inside carefully, pulling Emma close behind her. The dim light from outside barely reached the corners, leaving most of the cabin in shadow. At first glance, it looked abandoned. A small table stood near the center, a chair tucked beside it. Shelves lined the walls, holding objects she couldn't fully make out. Everything was still, quiet, untouched. But as Sarah took a few steps forward, Her eyes began to adjust. And that's when she noticed it. There wasn't as much dust as there should have been. She frowned slightly, looking around more carefully now. The floor wasn't completely covered. There were patches, small areas that looked cleaner than the rest, as if something had disturbed them. "Stay close," she whispered again, though her voice had dropped even lower. Emma held onto her hand tightly. Sarah moved toward the table. Her fingers brushed against the surface, expecting a thick layer of dust, but instead it felt uneven. Some parts were dusty, yes, but others felt smoother, recently touched. Her heart skipped a beat. That didn't make sense. No one had been here for 25 years. At least, that's what she had always been told. She stepped back slightly, her eyes scanning the room with a new kind of attention. The chair near the table wasn't perfectly aligned. It was angled just a little, as if someone had stood up from it not too long ago. "Mom," Emma's voice trembled, "I don't like it here." Sarah forced herself to stay calm, even though the uneasiness inside her was growing. "It's okay," she said softly, though her eyes kept moving, searching, questioning. "It's just old, that's all." But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Old places don't shift on their own. Old places don't leave signs of movement. Her gaze moved toward the shelves. Some items were covered in dust, clearly untouched for years, but others looked different. A small box near the edge appeared cleaner, its surface faintly reflecting the dim light. She stepped closer, her movements slow, cautious. Her fingers hovered over it before she finally touched it. No thick dust, just a thin layer like it had been wiped not long ago. A quiet chill ran down her spine. She turned slightly, her eyes now sharper, more alert. And that's when she saw it. Footprints. Faint but there. Near the doorway, leading further inside. Not clear enough to tell whose they were, but visible enough to prove one thing. They weren't alone. Sarah's breathing grew shallow. She tried to stay quiet, listening carefully. The cabin was still, but now that stillness felt heavier, like it was hiding something beneath it. "Mom, did you hear that?" Emma whispered suddenly. Sarah froze. At first she heard nothing. Then very faintly. A sound. Soft. Almost unnoticeable. Like something shifting above them. Her eyes slowly lifted toward the ceiling. The second floor. Her grip on Emma tightened without her realizing. Every instinct told her to leave, to turn around and walk out, to not go any further. But another part of her, the part that had brought her here in the first place, refused to let her run. She needed to understand. Needed to know what was happening. Because this wasn't just an abandoned cabin anymore. This was something else entirely. Sarah took a careful step forward, her gaze fixed on the staircase at the far end of the room. The wood looked worn but not broken. The railing was intact, slightly polished in places that didn't match the rest of the cabin. Another sign. Another detail that didn't fit. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her heart pounding harder now. The air felt colder here, heavier somehow. She glanced back toward the door for just a second, the faint light from outside still visible, still offering a way out. But she didn't move toward it. Instead, she looked up. The darkness above seemed deeper, thicker, like it was holding onto its secrets. And then, another sound. Clearer this time. A slow creak. Right above her. Emma squeezed her hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. "Mom," she whispered, barely able to speak. Sarah didn't respond right away. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything she had seen, everything she had felt since stepping inside. The clean surfaces, the shifted furniture, the footprints, the sounds. It all pointed to one thing. Someone had been here. Not years ago. Not decades ago. But recently. Maybe even now. Her fear was real, undeniable, pressing against her chest with every breath. But beneath that fear, there was something else growing. Curiosity. And a quiet, determined need to face whatever was waiting above those stairs. Sarah's hand tightened around Emma as she stood at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes fixed on the darkness above. Every instinct was telling her to leave, to run back into the cold night and not look back. But something deeper, something stronger, held her in place. She had come this far. She couldn't turn away now. "Stay close to me," she whispered, her voice low and steady despite the storm inside her chest. Emma nodded silently, her small fingers gripping tighter. Sarah placed her foot on the first step. The wood creaked under her weight, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the stillness of the cabin. She paused, listening, waiting. No movement followed, no voice, just silence again. Step by step she climbed. Each creak felt like a warning, like the house itself was aware of her presence. Her breathing slowed, controlled, but her heart pounded hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. At the top of the stairs, a narrow hallway stretched ahead. The walls were dim, lit only by a faint glow coming from a half-open door at the end. That light didn't belong in a place like this. It wasn't moonlight. It wasn't reflection. It was real. Sarah's steps grew slower as she moved forward. The floor beneath her felt slightly worn, smoother in certain places, as if walked on again and again. That same unsettling feeling returned, stronger now. This place wasn't abandoned. She reached the door. It was slightly open, just enough for the light to spill into the hallway. Her hand hovered near it, her fingers trembling just slightly. She could feel Emma pressing closer behind her, hiding in her shadow. For a moment, Sarah closed her eyes. Then she pushed the door open. Slowly, the hinges let out a soft creak as the door moved, revealing the room inside. And everything stopped. Her breath caught instantly, her body freezing where she stood. There was someone there. A man, sitting quietly beside a small lamp. His back slightly hunched, his hair gray, his face lined with years that spoke of solitude and time. He turned his head slowly, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. "Sarah," he said softly. The sound of her name felt unreal, like it didn't belong in that room. Her knees weakened. Her mind struggled to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. "Uncle David." Her voice barely came out, almost lost between disbelief and fear. He gave a small nod, his expression calm, almost gentle. For a second, Sarah just stared. Memories rushed back, scattered pieces of a past she hadn't thought about in years. A younger version of herself running through a backyard, a man laughing, lifting her into the air. Then suddenly nothing. He had disappeared, no explanation, no goodbye. Everyone had said the same thing. He was gone. No one knew where. And yet here he was, sitting in front of her, as if time had simply paused and waited for her to return. Emma peeked out from behind Sarah, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, who is that?" she whispered. Sarah didn't answer right away. She could. Her thoughts were tangled, her emotions shifting too fast to hold onto any one feeling. How are you here?" she finally asked, her voice shaking now. "Everyone said you disappeared." Uncle David let out a slow breath, his gaze steady but heavy with something unspoken. "I didn't disappear," he said quietly. The simplicity of his answer made it even harder to understand. "I stayed." The words hung in the air, heavy and strained. Sarah shook her head slightly, taking a step forward without realizing it. "Stayed here," her voice carried disbelief, almost frustration, "for 25 years. He didn't react to her tone. He just nodded again, slowly. "Yes." The room felt smaller now, filled with questions that demanded answers. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice rising just a little. "Why would you stay here? Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you tell anyone you were alive?" Uncle David looked down for a moment, his hands resting on his knees. There was no anger in his face, no defensiveness, Just a quiet weight, like he had carried these questions alone for a long time. "It wasn't that simple," he said after a pause. Sarah let out a short, almost bitter breath. "It never is," she replied. Emma shifted beside her, her small voice breaking through the tension. "Mom, I'm scared." Sarah immediately softened, pulling her closer. "It's okay," she whispered gently, even though she wasn't sure if it was true. Uncle David looked at Emma, his expression changing slightly, something softer appearing in his eyes. "She's your daughter?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes, this is Emma." He gave a small, almost distant smile. "She looks like you did at that age." The familiarity in his voice made something tighten in Sarah's chest. For a moment, the fear faded just enough for something else to surface. Recognition. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone she had once trusted, once loved without question. But that didn't erase the years of silence. "You don't just vanish and come back like this," she said quietly, her voice steadier now but filled with emotion. "You don't stay hidden while everyone thinks you're gone." Uncle David met her gaze, his eyes tired but honest. "I know," he said. That simple acknowledgement took some of the edge out of her anger, but not all of it. "Then explain it to me," she said. There was a long pause. The kind of silence that feels like it's carrying more than words ever could. Uncle David leaned back slightly, his eyes drifting toward the small window before returning to her. "I was asked to stay," he said finally. Sarah frowned. "Asked by who?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, as if the walls themselves held part of the story. "Your grandmother," he said. The name alone shifted something inside Sarah. "My grandmother," she repeated, her voice softer now. He nodded. She knew things she didn't trust anyone else with. Sarah felt a flicker of confusion, mixed with curiosity. "What things?" Uncle David didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured slightly toward the corner of the room. "Something she left behind." Sarah followed his gaze, her eyes landing on an old wooden chest resting against the wall. It looked simple, almost ordinary, but something about the way it sat there made it feel important. "She told me to protect it," he continued quietly, "to stay here until the right time." "And the right time is now?" Sarah asked. He looked back at her. "Yes." The certainty in his voice made her chest tighten again. All the fear, the confusion, the questions, they were still there. But now they were mixed with something else. A growing sense that this moment, as strange and overwhelming as it was, wasn't random. It had been waiting. For her. For this exact moment. And somehow, after everything she had been through, everything she had lost, she had walked straight into it. Sarah's eyes remained fixed on the wooden chest, her thoughts still struggling to catch up with everything that had just happened. The room felt heavier now, not with fear, but with something deeper, something that carried meaning she didn't yet understand. The soft glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the walls, making the chest look almost alive, as if it had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. Her fingers tightened slightly around Emma's hand before she slowly let go, stepping forward with careful hesitation. Every step felt deliberate, as if she were crossing into something she couldn't turn back from. Behind her, she could feel Uncle David's quiet presence, watching, waiting, saying nothing more. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice low, almost cautious. Uncle David didn't move. "Something your grandmother left for you," he replied gently. "For me," she repeated, her brows pulling together in confusion. "Why would she leave something here, hidden like this?" He took a slow breath, as if choosing his words carefully. "Because she knew you would need it one day, even if you didn't know when." Sarah's chest tightened at those words. Need it. The way he said it didn't feel casual. It felt certain, like something that had already been decided long before she ever stepped into this cabin. She turned her attention back to the chest. It was old, the wood slightly worn, but it didn't look abandoned. The surface wasn't covered in heavy dust like the rest of the room had once been. It looked preserved. That same strange detail again. Someone had been taking care of this place. Taking care of this. Her hand hovered over the lid for a moment. A quiet hesitation settled in her chest, not out of fear, but something closer to emotional weight. Opening it felt like more than just revealing what was inside. It felt like stepping into a part of her life she had never known. "Go ahead," Uncle David said softly. Sarah swallowed, then slowly placed her hand on the lid. The wood felt cool under her fingers. She lifted it. The hinges gave a soft, worn creak as the chest opened. And then she froze. Inside were stacks of neatly arranged papers, envelopes tied together, and beneath them, bundles of cash. Her breath caught instantly. For a moment she couldn't. Her eyes scanned the contents, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "No," she whispered under her breath, almost as if she didn't believe it. Emma stepped a little closer, peeking up from beside her. "Mom, what is it?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Her hand slowly reached inside, picking up one of the bundles. It was real, solid, not imagined, not a trick of the light. "Is this?" Her voice trailed off as she looked back at Uncle David. He nodded once. "Yes." Her heart began to race, not from fear this time, but from disbelief. "How much is this?" she asked quietly. "Enough," he replied. The simplicity of his answer only made it more overwhelming. Sarah shook her head slightly, her mind racing. "Why would Grandma leave this here?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "Why didn't anyone know about it? Why didn't she just use it or give it to us before?" Uncle David stepped a little closer, though he still kept his distance. "She didn't want it to be used the wrong way," he said calmly. "She believed that money like this should only be found when it truly matters." Sarah let out a small, shaky breath, her eyes dropping back to the chest. "It truly matters." The words echoed in her mind. Standing here with nothing left, with nowhere to go, with her daughter depending on her for everything. This moment mattered more than anything she had ever experienced. Her vision blurred slightly as tears began to form. All the nights of fear, all the moments of doubt, the helplessness she had felt just hours ago. And now this. It felt unreal, like something that wasn't meant to happen in real life. But it was happening. Right here, right now. Emma tugged gently at her sleeve. "Mom, are we okay?" she asked softly. That question broke something open inside Sarah. She looked down at her daughter, really looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet hope hiding behind it. And for the first time in days, Sarah felt an answer rise inside her that wasn't filled with uncertainty. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but steady. "We're okay." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She didn't need to. Because this time, it wasn't just fear or sadness. It was relief. Her hand moved again, this time picking up one of the envelopes tied with string. It looked older than the rest, slightly worn at the edges. Something about it felt different. She untied it slowly, her fingers trembling just slightly. Inside was a letter. Her name was written on the front, in familiar handwriting. "Sarah." Her breath caught again. "Mom, what is that?" Emma asked. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She carefully unfolded the letter, her eyes moving slowly across the page. Each word seemed to settle deeper than the last. "Dear Sarah," she read silently. Her throat tightened instantly. "If you're reading this, it means life has not been kind to you." Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept reading. "I always knew you were strong, but I also knew there might come a time when strength alone wouldn't be enough." Tears blurred her vision again, but she didn't stop. "This is why I prepared this, not as a gift but as a second chance." Sarah's breath hitched softly. A second chance. The words felt heavy, powerful, almost too much to take in all at once. You may not understand why I kept this hidden, but I trusted that when the time came, you would find your way here. Her grip on the letter tightened. Because she had. Against all odds, against all fear, she had come here. And when you do, I want you to remember this. No matter how lost you feel, you come from strength, from resilience, from love that never fades. A tear fell onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. Sarah pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself together, but it was becoming harder with every word. This is not just money, it is a foundation. A chance to rebuild, to rise again, to create something better for yourself and for those you love. Her eyes moved to the final lines. Don't be afraid to begin again. The room felt completely still as she lowered the letter slightly. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her emotions too full to name. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the relief. It was the feeling of being seen, understood, even after all these years. Her grandmother had known. Somehow, she had known that this moment would come. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second, letting everything settle. Then she looked at Emma again, her expression softer now, filled with something stronger than before. Hope. Real hope. Not the fragile kind that breaks easily, but the kind that stands, even after everything falls apart. She folded the letter carefully, holding it close for a moment before placing it back into the envelope. Then she looked at the chest again, not with disbelief this time, but with understanding. This wasn't just something left behind. It was something meant to be found. At exactly the right time, morning came quietly, almost gently, as if the world itself was trying not to disturb the fragile peace that had finally settled over Sarah and Emma. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah opened her eyes without panic rushing through her chest. There was no cold wind biting at her skin, no hard ground beneath her, no fear of what the next moment would bring. Just silence, warmth, safety. She lay still for a moment, staring at the wooden ceiling above her, letting it sink in. It hadn't been a dream. The cabin was real. The chest was real. The letter, every word of it was still echoing inside her. Beside her, Emma slept peacefully, her small face relaxed in a way Sarah hadn't seen in days. There was no tension in her expression, no quiet worry hiding behind her eyes, just rest. Sarah turned slightly, brushing her fingers gently through Emma's hair. A soft smile formed on her lips, not forced this time, not something she had to pretend. It was real, built from something steady and strong. "We're okay," she whispered again, almost to herself. And this time it didn't feel like a hope. It felt like truth. The air inside the cabin felt different in the daylight. What had once seemed mysterious and unsettling now felt calm, almost protective. The shadows had softened, the corners no longer hiding anything unknown. It was just a place now, a place that had held on to its secret until the moment it was needed most. Sarah slowly sat up, careful not to wake Emma. Her body ached slightly from the past few days, but even that felt distant compared to the relief settling inside her. She looked toward the corner where the chest still rested. It hadn't moved, but everything had changed. Her life, her path, her future. It all felt different now, like a door had opened where there had once been nothing but walls. Footsteps approached quietly from behind. "Did you sleep?" Uncle David's voice was calm, steady as always. Sarah turned her head slightly and nodded. "A little," she said softly. He gave a small nod in return, as if that was enough. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It had shifted into something quieter, something that didn't demand answers right away. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said after a pause. Uncle David shook his head gently. "You don't need to," he replied. "But you stayed here all this time," she said, her voice filled with quiet disbelief. "You protected this for me." For the right moment, he corrected softly. Sarah looked down at her hands, thinking about everything that had led her here. Every loss, every struggle, every moment where she felt like she had reached the end. And yet, she had been walking toward this all along. I almost didn't come, she admitted quietly. Uncle David gave a faint smile. But you did. That simple truth settled deeply inside her. Yes, she did. Not because she was fearless. Not because she knew what would happen. But because she refused to give up completely. And somehow that had been enough. Emma stirred gently, her eyes opening slowly. For a second she looked around in confusion, then her gaze found Sarah. "Mom," she whispered. Sarah immediately leaned closer. "I'm right here, baby." Emma blinked a few times, then a small smile appeared on her face. "It's warm," she said softly. Sarah let out a quiet breath, her heart softening even more. "Yes, it is." Emma sat up slowly, looking around the room again. "Are we staying here?" she asked. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "For now," she said gently, "but we're going to build something better, something of our own." Emma didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway, trusting her completely. That trust meant everything. Later that day, sunlight filled the cabin through the windows, bringing life into a place that had once felt frozen in time. Sarah moved through the space with a different kind of energy now, not cautious or afraid, but purposeful. She cleaned where she could, opened windows, let fresh air move through the rooms. Each small action felt like reclaiming something, like turning a forgotten place into something alive again. Uncle David watched quietly, offering help when needed but never stepping in too much. It was as if he understood that this rebuilding belonged to her. Days passed. Then weeks. The money from the chest became more than just a lifeline, it became a foundation. Sarah found a small place in town, simple but enough. She secured a job again, this time with a stronger sense of stability. Every step she took felt more certain than before, guided not just by survival but by purpose. Emma returned to being a child again. Laughing, playing, asking questions that didn't carry fear behind them. And Sarah, she changed too. Not just because her situation improved, but because something inside her had shifted. She no longer saw herself as someone who had lost everything. She saw herself as someone who had found her way back. Back from the edge. Back from the place where hope feels impossible. One afternoon, she returned to the cabin alone. The trees were quieter now, the path familiar. The cabin stood just as it had before, but it no longer felt mysterious. It felt like a beginning. She stepped inside slowly, looking around at the space that had once held so many questions. Now it held answers. Uncle David was there, sitting in the same place as before. "You came back," he said simply. Sarah nodded. "I needed to." She walked further inside, her eyes resting on the chest one last time. "It changed everything," she said quietly. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her. "You changed everything," he said. Sarah let those words settle. Because deep down she knew they were true. The chest hadn't saved her. It had given her a chance. But she had taken that chance. She had chosen to move forward. To rebuild. To believe again. She stepped outside after a while, the fresh air filling her lungs as she looked out at the trees. The world felt bigger now. Not overwhelming. Just full of possibility. And as she walked away from the cabin, not as someone escaping, but as someone moving forward, she carried something with her that no amount of money could ever replace. Strength that had been tested. Courage that had been discovered. And a quiet, steady belief that no matter how far life pushes you down, there is always a way to rise again. Moral: life can break you, take everything you have, and leave you feeling completely lost. But if you hold on, take even one step forward, and refuse to give up, you might discover that your lowest moment is not your end, but the turning point where everything begins again. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and emotional storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental. The message is meant to inspire hope, resilience, and belief in new beginnings.